Hello, my name's Garton.
I'm Keith Richards.
And we're here to talk about this book, Professional Encounters in TESOL, Discourses of Teachers in Teaching. This is a collection that we've edited, and it's based around the idea of career stages and the different types of discourse that teachers are involved in different phases of their career. There are 4 sections corresponding to 4 stages, which Keith will talk about later. But basically these are starting out, becoming experienced, new horizons, and passing on the knowledge. Each section in the book is organised in the same way. We start with an introduction where we imagine a teacher at that particular stage of their career, and we imagine the sorts of issues that they have, the sorts of things that they're thinking about, that they're concerned with. Then there are 3 chapters in each section where each writer writes about some aspect of talk at that particular career phase, and we will go through that later. And then the final section in each, the final part of each section is where we've asked a practising teacher who's actually at that stage of their career to reflect on the chapters and to write about the significance of the chapters for them.
Sorry, I saw that drink. Well, that was the coherent part of the talk. We'll get incoherent now. What I'd like to talk about is the idea behind it of this career stages and discourse. Why did we do that? Take the first one first. I mean, there's a lot of work, growing body of work, in fact, on teacher thinking, teacher cognition, on teacher experiences, a socio-cultural context. And I think it's fair to say, and as I say, this is growing, that more and more we're beginning to understand about the experience of being a teacher and of being a person who is a teacher. And we felt we wanted to contribute to that, but not sort of in general terms. We felt that we wanted to frame it through the stages in a career. So what we did is we took a model that was developed by Macmillan, who did extensive research. Super nice, an early diagram if you can see it. If you can't, just buy the book. And basically, the Macmillan model, the first part is survival. You know, the first duty of a teacher is to survive, and the first few years are really about that, as experienced teachers will know. From that point, there becomes a period of stabilisation where you actually settle in and become experienced. After that, the career paths tend to take 2 broadly very different, broad paths, if you like, very different. One, a fairly conservative path, and the other one much more into sort of activism, investigation. And then finally, they come together in a process of disengagement as the teacher reaches the final phases. So that's the career stages. And we thought it would be really interesting to actually take the career and take teacher perspectives on that. But we also felt it was important to get a particular line through that, a particular angle on it. And we felt the discourse was probably the way of doing that. And the reason we chose discourse is, as we know from research into discourse, people actually construct their identity. They construct themselves through talk, through discourse. And this applies to the professional and the personal. They also, or we also, construct our business through discourse, what we do through discourse. So we felt that gave us a way into the stages in experience that would open up some interesting things. And that was the thinking behind it. The other thing we tried to do, didn't we, was to get a fairly global perspective. Never easy to do, and you never do it perfectly, but at least we wanted to go broader than perhaps we might otherwise have done by deliberately setting out for a broad range. And that basically is the
reasoning
thinking.
behind it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And well, now
what's in it?
What's in it? Yeah. If we can remember it. What's in it? Okay. She's cribbing from the book.
Yes, right. So as we said before, we have 4 sections. The first section is about starting out. So we look at teachers right at the very beginning of their careers, and probably the singularly most important thing at that stage is the initial teacher training that teachers go through, and within that, one of the most significant events that trainee teachers are involved in is the post-observation feedback. We have 2 chapters that look at post-observation feedback. Fiona Copland's chapter looks at it from the point of view of the way in which the trainer in feedback may have expectations of which the trainee is unaware. She presents the feedback event as a genre, and the trainee may not be aware of the conventions of the particular genre. So Fiona looks at what the consequences of that, potentially quite serious, might be. Nora Houghton, on the other hand, actually looks at the feedback given to trainee teachers and looking at corrective and confirmatory feedback, and in particular at the very positive impact that confirmatory feedback can have. And the final chapter in this section is Paul Seedhouse's chapter, and that's a kind of a transition chapter from initial training to the classroom, as he compares the classroom talk of trainee teachers, of new teachers and more experienced teachers. And it's also a transition from the first part of the book to the second.
Becoming experienced, yes. And in fact that becoming experienced is quite difficult in some ways, because of course it is a process, and in a sense, you know, you're never fully experienced. The process continues throughout your career. But we were looking at that move towards that stabilisation and that feeling of confidence that comes with it. We kick off actually with Sue's chapter. There you go. So we're going to end on a high. But what Sue actually does is she looks at a couple of teachers, and she shows how as the teacher beliefs form and how they relate, in fact, to the interaction in the classroom, the sort of teachers they are. And she draws this connection, I think, between the idea of what sort of beliefs you have about teaching, almost in a way what sort of person you are, I guess, and how that can have an impact on your teaching. And as you become experienced, of course, that becomes more obvious. So it's a good link back into that process in the Paul Seedhouse chapter. The second one is, in many ways, it's an unusual chapter, but I think it's really personal. I don't know of work around on this. It's teacher observation, but not in the sense of the trainee stuff in the first part. It's actually looking at that thing we all hate, you know, having the observed lesson. Now, that can be for peer review, it can be very positive, but it can also be part of an appraisal where your job sort of hinges on whether you succeed or fail. And that actually is the situation that Amanda explored. And she looks at the way teachers respond to this and how it affects their interaction. So I think that's quite a revealing chapter for all teachers, really. Yeah. Anyone who's ever gone through it, anyway. So we took that approach, and finally we thought it would be good to take it outside the classroom, and that's what Muna Morris-Adams does. She takes the talk from the classroom to outside the classroom, and where teachers are beginning, through becoming experienced, to explore new things that they perhaps wouldn't try in the first stage. And then, of course, once you are experienced, you reach another stage, which Sue's going to talk about.
Yes, your new horizons. So at this point, we imagine a teacher who's been teaching for many years, maybe 10 years, obviously has a lot of experience, is a reflective teacher, very concerned with what goes on in the classroom, maybe goes to the conferences, TESOL, TESOL conferences, but kind of has a feeling that this is all very informal and is perhaps not quite enough. So maybe this teacher is looking for a new direction to go in. And the 3 chapters in this section all look at very different directions that teachers can go in at this stage in their career. One possibility, and perhaps the most obvious one, is further academic study, and that's the concern of Phil Quirk's chapter, where he looks at how his website supported a group of teachers during their distance learning master's degree.
Yeah.
And in fact, out of this, Phil also developed a model of teacher knowledge, of which the final phase was providing knowledge, which actually leads into our 4th part, but we won't go there just yet. Steve Mann's chapter focuses more on the possibility of professional development in the local context. And using a cooperative development framework, he shows how through doing cooperative development, teachers were able to articulate their ideas and to take their professional development forward through non-evaluative discourse.
Yeah.
And then the final chapter in this section is Keith.
You can't win them all, can you?
Where Keith looks at teachers actually moving out of teaching to an extent and into management. And he follows through a group of teachers who were setting up their own school and looks at the discourses of all the various phases of setting up the school, consolidating, and the discourses of organisation, negotiation, management aspects.
Yeah, yeah, and the way they taught in the school that a particular form of discourse emerges. Yeah, and I guess that's the final stage.
So that's on to the final stage.
Which I'm afraid is a very sad one, really. It's the disengagement stage in the Huberman model. What I didn't say when I talked about the model is that Huberman actually identifies two forms of disengagement. There's the serene form and the embittered form. And, it's quite sad, really, isn't it? I mean, the serene form is you get this image of the sage sitting there and calmly accepting what the profession in life delivers. And the embittered one is the miserable old so-and-so who's scrunched up in the corner of the staff room moaning about this and complaining about that, So I wrote the teacher thing on that, I saw myself. But no, it's an interesting stage, and in a way it throws up very new challenges. And even if you're watching this and you're not there yet, if you stay in the profession, it's something that needs to be negotiated in some ways just as delicately as the coming in the first place. So we decided to approach it in a slightly different way, really, because the first paper, instead of having what you'd expect, which is someone at the end of their career, we took someone who actually is quite young, but happened to be, this is Harry Kucher's chapter, he happens to be the youngest government inspector in his country. And it's in Cameroon, and it's a country where age is given great respect. So he has to go out there to these schools with much older teachers, much more experienced teachers, and actually, present to them new ideas and persuade them to do new things and work with them. So it's quite a challenge for him, and it opens up a different perspective on this idea of being, older, more experienced. We decided rather than have, someone like me, chuntering on about what it was like to be old and we'd actually get someone younger to give us a perspective on that. Which we think is very interesting the way that he does it. The second one is a very practical chapter, because one of the things that teachers sometimes feel they want to do, when they have this wealth of experience and insight that it generates, is they'd like to pass it on. And there are lots of ways of doing that. You can do it, through work with colleagues, through chats in the staff room. But sometimes you feel you want to put it on paper, and you might do that in a teacher's magazine, a teacher's journal, or in some other form. So we asked Sue Wharton, who's done a lot of work in this area of discourse, and moving from one form of writing to another, to actually talk through the practical things you need to do if you're considering becoming a writer in that sense. And so that chapter is different, but we felt nevertheless very important at that stage.
Well, I think we also wanted to try to encourage teachers
to actually do that.
More,
yeah, that's true.
I think one of the things in our profession is that there aren't enough teachers around the world writing about their experiences.
That's true.
And
That's
sharing
absolutely true. And I'll come back to that in a different way actually right at the end, because where the book finishes is we wanted someone who, not at the end of his career, but is approaching that final sort of run-in, as it were, and can look back on a very rich and a very varied and very successful career as someone who works with teachers to help them develop. As a teacher at the start, and he talks about that, but also, and through his studies, but also as a teacher developer, as someone who's been intimately involved in this around the world, and to reflect, to look back on his career, warts and all, and the successes and the challenges, and from the perspective of someone there, and we felt that would be a good way of wrapping it up. But it also introduces that other thing that Sue mentioned, this idea of the teacher and the teacher voice. Because what we really, really felt was important was to actually get those practicing teachers, didn't we?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's why we had the final reflection section in each section, the final reflection chapter.
In a section?
Yeah, section.
She's getting into poetry here. This is getting quite exciting. Yeah.
Where we actually asked practicing teachers from around the world, we tried to get a very international, global perspective on this, covering different continents, and we asked them to actually read the chapters and to reflect on them and to just write for us what those chapters meant for them, or what it means for them to be at this stage in their career.
Facing each other. Did it ring true?
Yeah.
And the other thing we did was, whereas we edited the main chapters, as it were, we decided that with these teacher reflections, we would not edit them at all. That, within the limits of the law, they could say whatever they wanted to say about that stage and about the chapters, and we just left it to them. And I guess, you know, looking back on the book, it's one of the things we found most exciting,
Yeah.
wasn't it? And I guess if we did it again, we'd probably want to get more of that in there.
I think we'd want to give even
Yeah.
more space.
More
Yeah.
space to that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we've discovered is this sense of the raw voice. There are all sorts of research techniques that will enable us to, if you like, get underneath things through interview techniques, through other forms of field work to understand teachers. But in a sense, by the time they get into the journals, by the time they're presented, often, although the teachers' voices might emerge, the thing is in some ways, it's a tidy version.
Yeah.
And we wanted the raw voice. And I think that there's more space for that.
I think there is.
There's more space for the autobiography, I think, in our field. And maybe that's where things will go. And, you know, I hope it would, really. We can hear more of that. And I guess on that note, we can say thank you very much for listening.
Thank
and
you very
watching.
much.
And enjoy the book. Thanks.